Um, hey everybody, how you doing? Happy New Year's, or what will be Happy New Year's. Uh, I kind of wanted to do this video for a while now, and it just never seemed like the right time for me to sit down and do it because I've always been busy, and so I wanted to do it before Thanksgiving, but work, school, just been a lot. Then I also wanted to I didn't want to interrupt anybody's Thanksgiving and good family vibes, so then I wanted to do it before Christmas, but just never had time to sit down and do it. And I didn't really want to interrupt anybody's New Year's and feeling good about 2020, but I really wanted to get this done. It's been on my mind, so unfortunately, I finally had time now to sit down and do it here on the 31st, which wasn't my plan, but it's whatever. So the reason why I really wanted to do this because I wanted you to at least experience or feel a certain way about everything that's happening in 2019, the whole recap, and you going in 2020 with a whole new mindset. A whole new way about using a way of thinking about using your voice and articulating what you need and putting that out into the atmosphere and claiming what's rightfully yours. So, in late August of 2019 marked 400 years since the first African slaves were brought to the American colonies. The first African slaves were brought in the American colonies in 1619 in Jamestown, in Virginia. Now, that means that the whole time from 1619 to 1808. Now, with 1619, that's a reference point. There were African slaves brought before then, but that's the reference point that historians tend to use to describe when the period where African slaves were first really being brought in amongst the Atlantic slave trade. Now, during that time period, you have slavery in all the 13 colonies over time, and then they're breeding slaves within the American colonies, and then they're also selling them and trading them within the American colonies, as well as other places and other plantations like the islands, the Caribbean islands, and Mexico, and all this stuff, and even in European countries and etc. So they're breeding them in the American colonies, and they're bringing them over from Africa to American colonies. So there's two ways, to kind of uh, bring in slaves. Two ways of producing slaves. Now, the act prohibiting the importation of slaves from the Atlantic slave trade was passed by the United States Congress in 1807. And it was a federal law stated that no new slaves were permitted to be imported into the United States. And it took effect in 1808. So, in 1808 is when I'm going to go off of. So, let's do some math here. 1808, from 1619 to 1808, that's 189 years. And that's 32 years after American independence. So that's 189 years of producing slaves two ways. Now, let's jump into a little bit about 1808. By the time the Atlantic slave trade is prohibited in the United States. And, of course, there were other anti-slavery laws like the Three-Fifths Compromise and such to weed America off of slaves. But I'm not getting into that whole lesson on that or anything like that. Just know slavery was a very prominent way of America's economy for 189 years before we said no more slaves from Africa are allowed in the United States. All right. By 1808, the Louisiana Purchase was already made in 1803. Lewis and Clark expedition to explore the new land that we got happened in 1804 to 1806. So a lot of this stuff was already, and we already got new states, and people are already expanding westward, forming territories for the United States. So we have new states like Vermont, Kentucky, Tennessee, Ohio already involved, added to the United States in 1808 for the election of 1808. And when people migrate or frontier outward or pioneer outward toward the west, they bring their livelihoods with them. So if they own slaves, they would bring them with them, and that would further expand slavery and further expand plantations and further expand the economy system of slavery. And so as a result, slaves would be everywhere within the United States. It would further expand the way that we produce slaves within the United States. But that's even before the Atlantic slave trade is canceled. So before it's prohibited, people are expanding westward and taking slavery, and we're adding to the bulk of how we are producing slaves. Then, instead of two ways, after 1808, America's cut to one way of producing slaves. One way. So, okay, let's fast forward to 400 years later. African Americans, or black people, make up a fifth of the population in the United States. Out of 329.45 million people in the United States as of 2019, black people make 1/5 of the population 400 years later. So if you're following really what I'm saying, like a light bulb should have gone off and a huge question mark should be on your forehead. If the first African Americans, not African Americans, the first African slaves were brought in the colonies in 1619, and the Atlantic slave trade continued in the American colonies, and meanwhile the Atlantic slave trade is continuing, you're allowed to trade slaves and breed them and reproduce and produce slaves all in the United States, even after the colonies fought for their independence. That's two ways that the U.S. produced black slaves until 1808. So 189 years of insourcing and breeding slaves, and 189 years of producing black slaves. 189 years of expanding slavery into new territories and land. So in 189 years, where did all the black people go? Then even after the U.S. banned its participation in the Atlantic slave trade, the U.S. slave trade still existed until 1865. So 57 more years of Americans producing and trading their own slaves. And all the African slaves, I'm pretty sure, didn't just die off of natural causes in 57 years. Those who were brought in right at 1808. I would hope that they got to live past 57 years, depending on the plantation they went to. So, but in total, that's 246 years of slavery, 189 years of producing black slaves two ways, and 57 years of producing slaves one way. Even though after that one way, once we got that one way, there were way more restrictions because, we had the whole battle of free states versus slave states. Okay, cool, calm, collect. But, we're not getting into the whole deck. You should have already learned about the Compromise of 1850 and all that stuff, and the Missouri Compromise and stuff like that. But even then, where all the black people go? Two ways to one way, 189 years plus one way, 57 more years. So then, In 1865, you know, slaves are freed, whatever. Reconstruction period comes. Well, after the Civil War, Reconstruction period comes. All right, and there's two waves of this. There's military Reconstruction, which is when the military is literally, the federal military is occupying the southern states of the Confederate States that were in act of rebellion. They're occupying them now because they seceded from the Union, and basically they're keeping everybody in check. And you have to maintain the laws to protect African Americans. At this point, the military is there to make sure that that is happening. All right. So with that, you see the rise of black education. You see the rise of our black leaders. That's when we get our first black U.S. House representatives and stuff like that. You see the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments being passed. You get to see blacks relocate to a better life up north or whatever they want to, because they said, I'm done with this stuff. They get to go find their loved ones that were sold off, XYZ. And then some stayed, because, you know, what do I have? I don't have anything. I don't know how to read. I don't know how to write. I don't know how to work. All I know is do field work, and I stay with Master and, you know, work off of that. But you see a prominent rise in black excellence. Then, what did the U.S. government decide to do? We got it all fixed up. We gave you rights. We gave you this, blah, blah, blah. You know what? We're just going to take the military back. We can't keep spending money to protect you all. So, at this point, that goes from judiciary justice to frontier justice or frontier law, where the normal common man decides what is ethical and right. He takes the law into his own hands. So you see the rise of groups like the KKK, Ku Klux Klan, who organize and to terrorize black people, and you see the fall of our black leaders at this time. There's no more black U.S. Representatives and this, that. They terrorize our people, and they take and do lynch mobs and all kind of stuff, and they oppress us to keep us down. Now, he said, while I'm talking about this, like, I'm part Native American and everything, so I will be doing another video at some point on, you know, like, Native Americans and Latinos and etc. Because I believe that everybody has their stories, XYZ. Like this, I ain't doing this just to be like, you know, the woke black person talking about black people, but this is an important issue too. He was like, Native Americans are also an important issue as well. But dive back into it. So they withdraw all the forces. You see the rise of these organizations and stuff trying to limit the black man. So then you also see another surge, and the Gold Rush also took part in this, but you also see another surge of black people deciding, I'm moving on and finding a better life somewhere else. And so the Great Migration and finding opportunities and everything else. So that causes a lot of people to relocate again. Again, some people stay. I've been here, I survived through this, I keep surviving, you know, XYZ. But a lot of people, again, relocate. So fast forward to the 1920s and 30s. And despite both de jure segregation, which means segregation by law, Jim Crow, and de facto segregation, which means segregation by fact, black people began to create their own opportunities. And don't think that segregation just existed in the South. It existed everywhere in the United States at the time. There are known places up north, just like in South, that separated based on race, that black people could only go in certain areas and white people could go this. He was like, do not think that it was just only in the South. There are some instances where it is in other places in the United States where people were separated based on color. This is true. He said it wasn't as big the further north you up got, but do know it did happen, and do know that certain people up north felt certain prejudiced ways towards black people up north even then. But anyway, so black people began to create their own opportunities. Even though we live in isolation, we decided to make our lives better for our own people, and we cultivated ourselves and placed ourselves as prominent artists and entrepreneurs in America. You know, America, if you really think about it, America is a younger country compared to many other countries like European countries. And in not just European countries, but also African kingdoms. And despite us being a superpower, we still rank low in comparison to these other countries in our STEMs, careers, and education systems. But what I'm really trying to get to you to understand is most of these countries take value in their arts. Culture of the arts is a very important thing in the progression of your people and your nation. In other words, a renaissance. And when I talk about the arts, I'm talking about poetry, movies, uh, drama, dance, music, XYZ. A renaissance. So all them black leaders I just mentioned before, people migrating and deciding to find better opportunities to cultivate themselves and enrich their lives and progress their life, there was a renaissance. And renaissance means rebirth, revival, often capitalized a movement or period of vigorous artistic and intellectual activity. The United States has only had one renaissance in its history. Now, we are a younger country, so other countries have had a longer time to have a whole renaissance period, but we've only had one, the Harlem Renaissance. Despite being isolated, African Americans sought to education and worked to produce culture, sacred works that created the foundational art forms that helped lead America into a new forefront. You see, you start to see a rise of black pride, culture, and we establish ourselves as prominent figures in American society because of the Harlem Renaissance. You see the rise of black leaders. Jazz helped give birth to all forms of American popular music genres, aside from country and folk music. Jazz also gave birth to the civil rights movement. The KKK were supporters of prohibition as it was a means to fight race mixing in speakeasies and bars where jazz performers were playing and partying together. This was a means to make it seem that what blacks were doing was wrong because music brought people together and still brings people together. Like to this day, I can talk to somebody I don't even know, and we chatting it up about music and stuff. Um, so, you know, like the prominent figures like Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong and Frank Sinatra and uh, Danny Kane, Judy Garland, and all these people, both black and white artists, are touring and being on stage together, performing and promoting, working together and holding hands and singing together and all this stuff. KKK won't feeling that. He was like, certain acts weren't allowed to perform in southern states because they promoted race mixing, and so one of the ways to fight that was prohibition. Make where all this partying and coming together and alcohol and drinking illegal. And so while this was illegal, the U.S. government was making money off of this. Mobsters are smuggling in the imported alcohol, and they gain to be prominent figures, if you will, in the community. Prominent figures. It was like, then they use their money to help their friends bribe the legal system, help their friends, and pay candidates to get their agendas passed. Exploiting black excellence, continuing to tax African Americans and make us look as criminals or thugs doing illegal activities under the gaze of prohibition. So Harlem gave a new birth of identity to black people. And we see many further their education and even travel up north to expand their opportunities. And we begin to see the rise of black leaders and groups like W.E.B. Du Bois, the NAACP, and by the 1950s and 60s, MLK, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, and SNCC and SCLC, and so forth. They're traveling up north to go learn and have fun at the same time, but also gain an understanding of themselves and how they are going to better their community. This is given from the Harlem Renaissance. And guess what? Black excellence just doesn't fit Uncle Sam's picture. So what did they do? Just like they did with Black Wall Street, they destroyed it. This time, they did it discreetly. During the civil rights movement, and a lot of this dawned on me after watching the movie Paid in Full, and then I watched the interviews from the people that lived the life actually in the Paid in Full, like Ace. There's an interview on YouTube. Go watch the whole thing, and he really breaks it down about drug life and being a drug lord, a drug dealer, and all this stuff. And he really explains it's not a life you want to get into, and he really paints a prominent picture about how American life was ravaged. But anyway, just like they did with Black Wall Street, they destroyed it. But they did it very discreetly. During the civil rights movement, and by the time it ends, and even though the civil rights movement is still going on, I want to say that by the time the civil rights movement, as we know it, as the end of segregation, by the time it was about to end during the 1960s, they killed our leaders, Malcolm X, MLK, both the Kennedys. Our people were dying. They were they were getting rid of them. And then what the America did, the U.S. government would do is they would find a young, passionate young man and manipulate them to take the mantle of being the community's leader, but trick him into really hurting the community. Before they sold drugs in white neighborhoods, not just white neighborhoods, rich white neighborhoods, because I say rich white because they did affect poor white neighborhoods too. They tried to, because that was seen as land. All these people out here, get rid of them and we'll take their land and all their valuable land, blah, 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 blah. So rich white neighborhoods. Before they sold them in rich white neighborhoods, they sold drugs in black neighborhoods to test it out and see how it would ravage us before they made a controllable version and sold it to rich white neighborhoods. Think about it. Our leaders are gone, and here is a young, struggling black male who is passionate about making his situation better, is taught the art of selling drugs. He then is let loose in his own community to sell to his own people and make so much money, he then becomes either greedy or high on his horse. Then he battles his own people who also want a piece of the action, and then they start a war with each other for territory. Meanwhile, the community they selling these drugs to, are now addicted to every command their new leaders say, literally addicted to whatever they say to get their fix. They're helping the community because they're keeping the lights on to some people's houses. So they are leaning on their everyday foot. Meanwhile, the druggie over there is literally leaning on everything they say to get his fix. He was like, that's a different type of addiction. One is literally addicted to drugs, and one is literally addicted to getting the money to make ends meet. And then once he has enough, he make a little bit more, he feel good about himself, and he likes feeling good about himself. That's an addiction. But hey, I'm not here to argue or anything like that. But basically, they are then drugged up version. They both are drugged up versions of themselves. Harlem, as well as many other black prominent areas of black culture, decay, and some places become abandoned or overrun with junkies. You are a drugged up version now of yourself, of your former self. He was like, before you got hooked on drugs or before you got hooked to selling it and all that, you thought better about your life and had a higher understanding of enlightenment. Literally, now your mentality is effed up. Then this new leader, this person that they brought up to sell drugs into their own community, the new leader trains his successor in his very ways, and thus the degrading cycle begins you know, like the old drug dealer dies, and then the new young struggling young black male, even more ambitious than his and predecessor, wants to help deplete his community even more. Remember American Gangster when Bumpy Johnson is handing out turkeys like he's the king of the community, but he's a drug lord. He's hurting people with the drugs he sells. And then Frank Lucas is hanging on his every word and this, that. He idolizes him, but he wants a little more peace. He wants to take things a little serious. So here comes Frank Lucas, and later on in the movie, he does the same exact thing with the turkeys, passing them out to all the people. The people love him or everything. Like he's the king, but he's selling heroin to the community. And then there's even one scene when he finally gets arrested. He says, "I took care of Harlem. Harlem gonna take care of me." Did he really take care of Harlem? See, after that, the only difference in the test run period for the drugs in these black communities is completely legal when it's really prominent at its first point. If that makes sense. Like when Frank Lucas brought heroin in at that time, there was no major drug laws placed on it. That's why he got to make it so good. He was fine up in the beginning till he started living a flashy lifestyle, and then people started catching on to what it was doing in the communities and stuff, and they finally was like, "Yo, we gotta do something about this." But at first, when he was really starting to bring in the cash, it was no real drug laws on this stuff. It was like that, and then you get further on, like there were no major drug laws placed on cocaine or crack or whatever it was, with Ace in them and paid in full. There were very few restrictions, even if there were a few task force out there. Drug laws, when things were first coming about and people really started making money off it, were very scarce. You watch the interview with Ace, he'll tell you like they had lines, people lined up to buy the crack and cocaine. They had people lined up to come buy that. There was no laws, no restrictions. They had lines waiting outside for people to come buy that stuff. So when the Young Thugs eventually we get to the 80s and further on in the 90s or whatever. When the Young Thugs are finally able to take over Harlem, because all the other people are locked up and stuff, and many other black communities are at this point ravaged and destroyed, and the mentality of those leaders are even more corrupt. So after our communities are destroyed, what does Uncle Sam do now? He makes it illegal, and then all of a sudden comes the war on drugs. So the test run period basically is up at this point, and it's time to make money, period, off of all kind of people, because America's greedy and whatever. And now we're gonna water it down and sell it as controlled substances in rich white communities, and we're gonna sell it in different forms. But all those black people, all those intelligent leaders and people that we made, all those black leaders that we put them in the picture, to sell and ravage the community. Now let's take them out of the picture. All right, and then let's also take the users of these people. Let's take their money too. I mean, not money. We're gonna take them out of the picture too. Any matter of fact, basically lock up anyone else that's found with drugs on them, and we're gonna throw away the key. That leaves the territories up for grabs for small individuals who now are trying to be big time, and now that they're gonna start gang wars, and they're gonna kill each other, because now the territory is up for grabs for anyone, and they're basically gonna kill them off, and then whoever kills who, round that person off, put them in jail, prison, lock away the key, and slowly but surely the population will dwindle down to nothing. They're going to continue to sell to each other, and we're going to take away the key, and if you're caught with it, we take away the key, and you're gonna go kill somebody and war over it, and we're gonna, basically everybody's against each other now. So we're gonna take away the kick, and those caught in the crossfire, basically are an added bonus. Use whatever kind of force or brutality or harassment necessary. So think about that for a second. Jimmy, who has nothing to do with drugs, who's a smart kid and goes to school and helps his mom out and does everything, and he's a good kid and whatnot, accidentally gets shot between police and a gang outside wherever. A stray bullet hits him. That's an added bonus. And I'm telling you this to understand it, because really and truly, it's all about population control. Population control is the point of it all. So pay real close attention to everything you see in the media, TV, and etc., because you got to be mindful in 2020 of everything that they're selling to you and how it affects you, because it all points to population. So pay very close attention, because the whole point is to limit the population, and more importantly, limit the population of minorities. And it doesn't just stop at drugs. Believe it or not, the idea of abortion, birth control, that was a way to implement population control, specifically African Americans and other unfavorables. Margaret Higgins Sanger popularized the term birth control. She opened the first control clinic in the United States and established organizations that evolved into the Planned Parenthood Federation of America. Cool, sounds like a good idea. We need more birth control out there, and people need to understand that. Understand this. She supported eugenics. Do you know what eugenics is? Eugenics is the idea that only the superior race or people should be able to reproduce and have babies, and then in return they'll be the superior, and eventually we'll have a race of superior beings. All the other races will die out, and we will be the superior. And oftentimes what was supported with this idea was that the inferior races were blacks, Jews, even though Judaism is not a race, Asian, Hispanic, Latino, basically all of them, don't need to be able to need to be sterile. XYZ, they need to have birth control, whatever. They don't need to reproduce. Only pure white need to reproduce. And she was a supporter or supported by, there's some, some people have some discrepancies about that, but I believe she was a supporter of the KKK and the Women's Auxiliary of the Ku Klux Klan, which she has spoke to, she did speeches with, and was closely associated with Klan and Nazi sympathizer Lathrop Stoddard, who was a known white extremist, white supremacist. He was known for this stuff. He wrote books on it, on white supremacy and all of that. He is influential in Nazi Germany, rising on their beliefs and the things that they believed in. His books have influenced that, and a lot of stuff. Now, before you go and make a conclusion, I actually do support pro-choice. I believe women have the right to choose and what goes on with them, and I support your decision if you choose to do that. But I'm also pro-life, and I think all life is precious. There are some stipulations with that, but they don't have nothing to do with this. I just want you to know that I'm not against abortion. I'm not saying that. I'm telling you the names of these people, so please look them up, like the interviews and stuff, and all these stuff. Go look them up. Get educated and look this stuff up on your own. In 2020, be educated. Don't just be woke. It means black without being educated. Be educated in everything, because it's leading towards population control. Even after the savage killing and public lynchings dwindled down, now they find ways to do it discreetly, whether in a jail cell and literally make you a bitch of the system, or gun you down by pulling you over for no reason by law enforcement. So Fast forward 400 years later in 2019, about to be 2020. 400 years, as the musical Les Miserables puts it, a slave of the law. Mentality, you were mentally in chains, a slave of the law. Or rather, a mental slave of the system's, excuse me, a mental slave of the system, the government. We are a fifth of the population. And whether you believe it to be real or not, the William Lynch letter, whether you believe the William Lynch letter is real or not, here's the real about it. It states some truthful statements in how in this 400-year cycle has gone for us in our daily lives and how we treat each other, our schools and education, our frats and sororities, and etc. It plays a very influential part. It talks some truth. And here's what it reads. I'm going to pull this up real quick. Here's where it's directly from. Now that you have a list of differences, I shall give you an outline of action. But before that, I shall assure you that distrust is stronger than trust, and envy stronger than adulation. Respect or admiration. The black slaves, after receiving this indoctrination, shall carry on and will become self-refueling and self-generated for hundreds of years, maybe thousands. Don't forget, you must pitch the old black male versus the young black male, and the young black male against the old black male. You must use the dark-skinned slaves versus the light-skinned slaves, and the light-skinned slaves versus the dark-skinned slaves. You must use female versus the male, and the male versus the female. You must also have white servants and overseers who distrust all blacks. But it is necessary that your slaves trust and depend on us meaning white people. They must love and respect and trust only us. Gentlemen, these kits are your keys to control. Use them. Have your wives and children use them. Never miss an opportunity. If used intensely for 1 year, the slaves themselves will remain perpetually, meaning continually and forever, distrustful. Thank you, gentlemen. Let's make a slave. So, do you understand, how I kind of broke it down for you? Like, first slaves being brought in, they're being changed mentally and everything, and then the system keeps going on. Then we get to Harlem. We have strong, prominent leaders, and then they disrupt them and cause distrust in their communities and this, that, and the third, and they break down and destroy, a prominent area where black culture, black excellence was prominent and moving forward and progressing. And then they tear that down, and then they do the war on drugs as a fake facade to just crack down even harder. Now that we've messed you up, now we get to take away your freedom and your obligations and stuff. And so, there's some real stuff. Never mind. Forget that thought. No, so, population control is all it's about. To suppress and use us up. And then discard you, get rid of you. So 400 years of this and still no reparation. Why not? Out of all the destruction upon my people, culture stealing and appropriating it for the benefit of others, the African American communities, and years of turmoil to keep us in bondage and in debt to the U.S. government, and still no reparations. The lives hurt to the point that we are only a 1/5. To the point that we are only 1/5 of the U.S. population. Now, 2019, about to be 2020. Years of turmoil to keep us in bondage and in debt to the U.S. government and still no reparations. America would not be today what it is today if it weren't for the work of slaves and hardship of African Americans. We get that apology in 2009 for slavery and Jim Crow, a simple way to sweep the issue under the rug type thing. And still nothing for the communities and lives hurt, still impacting people and families to this day. But guess what? They ain't. They're not. They're not going to give us reparations. And here's why. They can't give us reparations. Why you may ask? Like, you're not talking sense. What do you mean they can't give us reparations? They can't. Why you may ask? Because if they give blacks reparations, they have to also give reparations to every group that the U.S. ever wronged. That list is long. Believe it or not, that list is long. You got the Native Americans who were thrashed, basically lied to and manipulated over and over again, singling them out, pushing them further, scrunching them in, killing their people, their ancestry, their culture, wiping them out to this. A small area in the United States. A small community. And when I mean small based on the entirety of the United States. Yes, there are a lot of Native American groups around the United States still alive and still know their culture, still know speak their words and all that. What I mean by that is in percentage wise of the whole United States, they are pushed to a small corner or a small section. There's a lot of atrocities with them. You also got who else? The Japanese Americans that were isolated into internment camps, Middle Eastern Americans, Latino Americans, and even, believe it or not, some white groups too. The Irish and foreigners during the Gilded Age, when they would come and immigrated to the United States during that time that was very prominent in immigration and everything, they were not treated fairly either. They were put in ghettos and they were treated worse by xenophobists and many other nationalists and this, that, and the third who purposely tried to drive them out. And these are by regular white people and the U.S. government. And they weren't treated fairly and they were abused too. A lot of people that taxpayers from both the rich and the poor and money from the U.S. government corporations that couldn't fund in a lifetime. You got to think about it. For all those people that got to be reprimanded, the U.S. people, both rich and poor taxpayers, and money in reserve from the U.S. government, still couldn't fund all the reparations in a lifetime to those people and their ancestors and everybody who is still feeling the impact of all the atrocities the United States has. There's not enough money. 40 acres and a mule, let's break that down. Like, you're not getting that. So they can't give you any reparations. You can't even pay for it. And 40 acres of a mule, let's break that down. So everyone who was a slave, I'm not talking about where the term was coined and what happened during the Civil War, for 40 acres and a mule. That was actually a specific act done during the Civil War. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about everybody who be like, no reparations was my 40 acre and a mule. You're not getting that. 40 acres. My great-grandfather owned 96 acres. A black man during the 50s and 60s owned 96 acres in Jim Crow segregated America, southern states in America. A black man. He owned it. 96. That's a lot of land for a black man. 40, I'm gonna be honest, 40 acres, that's a good, decent living, but that's really not a lot of land. It's okay. That's an alright good. And a mule, it was like, well, you don't really want a mule because you're not gonna work that land. So you want the mule to be money, you're not getting it. You got to think about that. So every person who is a descendant of slaves gets 40 acres of mule. Be realistic. You're not getting that because there's not that much land left, for one. And you got to find out who is the origin point that you give that land to. Then you got to keep splitting sections off of it for all the descendants and XYZ. And when you really think about it, you'll probably end up with less than an acre. And then all that money, there's not enough money in the world to fund all that, and all the people who's still feeling the effects of all the atrocities America spent. So that's not gonna happen. Okay, you're not just gonna get reprimanded. So what do we do? Do we just complain about it? Well, I'm never one to complain and not provide a solution. I do not believe in that, and while nothing can be settled or appease the 400 years of devastation on my people and further years on other people in the XYZ, I think the best solution to help everyone, I think free public education for colleges and universities is the best solution that benefits all wrong groups. Think about it. That sounds like the most powerful reparation you could get for public colleges and universities, because that can help increase. That's an investment on yourself. That can help increase your money, your living conditions, and etc. Everything if you go get educated. This will help us regain our stride in society and help us uplift ourselves out of the brutal, struggling conditions we face and help everyone uplift their people in strong intellectual ways. Now, there are arguments, well, if it's free for everyone, everyone will go. And it would decrease the value of education and a degree if anyone could get in. That's BS. The answer to that is no, not at all would it decrease the value of a degree or the integrity of people or even a college campus if everybody has the opportunity to go for free. You know, if colleges get to keep their admission requirements, this helps regulate if people are able to attend for the semester or not and stay in and XYZ. Then if you fail a class, you fail a class. That's on you. That's on you. You effed up. You messed up. You need to get your life together. Free doesn't dictate if you put in the work to pass or not. Free doesn't dictate that. Even in high school and elementary schools are free, but you didn't pass every subject. Some people got held back too. Some people flunked out. So just because it's free don't mean that. Doesn't mean the value will be less appreciated either. Lastly, you know, some people are going to attempt to go to college and find out it's not for them at all. It sounds like a very nice solution or a start to the lack of reparations. And it would only be public colleges and universities, not private, because, you know, they do their own thing. They do their own source of funding and stuff like that. So that's on them to figure stuff out. But public, you know, why can't it be free? I think that's a good way for everyone who's been wrong to uplift their communities and further progress themselves as people, as individuals and their people. So, what do y'all think? Let me know. Is free education a good way to help provide reparations for 400 years of turmoil, or a good, or even just a good start, or a good start of form, a good starting point for reparations, or just not at all? It was like, but go in 2020 using your voice. If you believe that it is, use your voice. That's the whole point of this whole thing. Pay attention. Pay attention to everything that is in front of you, because they're trying to control the population. Believe it or not, they are. And global warming is a serious issue too, but they are trying to control the population. They're trying to X some people out. We are a fifth of the population. You need to be alert at all times of every subtle way they're trying to take you out of the picture. You need to progress yourself to be the best self you can be in 2020, and you need to use your voice. Every time that you have the opportunity to vote, you need to use it. You need to be educated and use it. You need to know what's going on in the world, and you need to know how it's affecting you. 400 years later, 500 years later, whatever. It won't be 401 years until August 2020. But, use 2020 to make the best, better self of you that you can. Be educated and use your voice to express your thoughts. If we use our voice, the politicians don't have a choice but to do what we say. We're not speaking out, America. We're not. The people aren't speaking out, and the politicians doing whatever they want to do and helping corporations and this, that. It's all about money now. But if you use your voice and say no, use your vote, things can change. I've seen it before. I've seen it happen. It was like, yes, we can. Yes, we did. Obama was in twice. Change can happen. You got to make it, though. You can't just sit around idly not doing anything. You got to use your voice. Have family conversations with your peers, your friends, co-workers. Have friendly conversations, especially in your home at dinner. Talk some stuff. Help your children progress to be young men and women that are knowledgeable of the things that go on in politics and this, that, and the third, because things do matter. If you teach them not to pay attention, they won't. The Bible speaks on this. I think it's 1 Corinthians 13. When I was a child, I thought as a child. When I became a man, I put away my childish ways. But your parents have to help you transition to think like that. And so you need to start every once in a while having a profound conversation with your kids. Even if they're not your kids, they're adults and they're in their 20s and whatever. Don't be afraid to talk to them, call them, and ask them, well, what do you think about this and that? And believe it or not, my grandfather does it all the time. He wears me and my cousins out, my sister, to death with his question. He does not stop asking questions. But it's all so you can think on a higher level, and that's my thing for 2020. Just be alert, pay attention, know when somebody's trying to squeeze you out, and use your voice. Let me know what y'all think, though. Do you think education is a good way to reprimand 400 years of turmoil? And then this, if it's free, it doesn't just help us; it helps everybody. All the people that were wronged, because believe it or not, they're not going to just pay just for all black people. So let me know what y'all think. I'm out. Happy New Year's. If I don't see you, love, peace, soul. Hey, hope much luck in the new year. 2020, baby. Hey, I'm out.